La última comunicante es Ruth Northway, que ha sido presidenta de la Sociedad Científica dentro del Royal College of Nursing. La doctora Northway ha sido profesora de enfermería en el ámbito de las dificultades del aprendizaje en la Universidad del Sur de Gales durante los últimos 13 años, donde lideraba la Unidad de Desarrollo de Discapacidad Intelectual. La profesora Northway enseña también cursos de pregrado, posgrado para enfermería en este área de la discapacidad del aprendizaje y supervisa a varios estudiantes de doctorado. Antes de trabajar como profesora en la universidad, trabajó con personas con dificultades de aprendizaje en una amplia gama de instituciones sanitarias y tipos de instituciones sanitarias en Inglaterra y Gales. Lleva trabajando en este área de la discapacidad intelectual 37 años, por lo que este año ha recibido un reconocimiento especial con motivo del 90 cumpleaños de la Reina de Inglaterra. Y sin más, le damos la palabra para que nos presente la visión del Royal College of Nursing en la investigación en enfermería.
Buenos días. I apologize at the beginning for my very, very limited Spanish. I did a few lessons many years ago when I was at school, so I'm having to rely on my long-term memory very much at the moment. So I apologize for that. Okay, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to come to this conference. I've been asked to speak from the perspective of how the Royal College of Nursing in the UK has really sort of tried to develop and lead on the development of research. What I would say, first of all, you can see from my slides, my full-time post is working in the University of South Wales. And I know that my sort of nursing area of specialism and interest, namely intellectual disabilities, isn't one which is perhaps common within nursing, and yet listening to colleagues when you're talking about things like long-term conditions, the impact of ageing, inequities in health, is obviously a group of people who are very much affected by all of those issues. So I sort of put out a plea, if there is anybody here who has an area of interest in intellectual disabilities, please come and say hello whilst I'm here. I'm here for all of the conference. To focus on what I've been asked to speak about from the Royal College of Nursing, some of you may be aware the Royal College of Nursing within the UK has a dual function. It is a sort of a trade union, and so has a number of activities which are focused on employment and conditions of work and things like that. But it also has very much a professional focus, developing the professional expertise within the nursing profession. And it does this in a number of different ways. One of its sort of structures for doing this is to have what we call various forums. A lot of those are focused on areas of specific practice. So we have forums related to children and young persons nursing, forensic nursing, mental health nursing, learning disability nursing. And within that, we also have the Research Society. And it's been my sort of privilege to act as the chair of that society for about the last, I think it's probably about 5 years now. Also, you can see on the slide, it's already mention has been made of it. This year, the RCN are celebrating their 100th anniversary. And what I want to say, I know the focus is, I've been asked to sort of look really at the last 20 years, but I want to go back a little bit further and just to say a little bit about how research has developed, because I think sometimes it's important to look at history to understand where we are now. What struck me when I started to look at this in preparation for this event was, I was talking about my lifetime. Now, to me, that obviously seems like a very, very short period of time. But increasingly, when I'm speaking to students, they tell me this is an awful long time ago. But I think, when we look back, think about the RCN has a history of 100 years. It's a relatively recent history, or a more recent history, when we think about the development of research in this context. So you're only going back to 1960, when really there was this decision to think about having a body within the RCN which was going to focus on research methods. You then had a period of time where there was quite a lot of activity, which I think was quite unique at that time, with developing research, trying to actually make sure that research reports were published, and some very key sort of publications came out during that time. looking at the study of nursing care project sponsored by the then Ministry of Health, so getting sort of government funding back in the 1960s to think about how to try and take some of this nursing research forward. But it wasn't until 1975 that we actually sort of see a first nurse advisor being appointed within the college for research. But since that point, obviously, there's been a lot of different sort of activities which have developed and a lot of different research and development activities which have taken place. One of those is the sort of Rcn Institute. Originally, this was based within the RCM, but more recently, I think it's probably back in the late 2000, I think it was about 2007, the RCN sought to try and develop its strategic links more with higher education. And so now this institute sits within the University of Warwick. And you can see there, I think there's some key things when you look at their sort of mission, vision and values, that it is about undertaking high quality research. But I think what is important to me is that it's relevant to nursing, health and social care, but also that it impacts on both practice, education and policy. The fact that we actually see research as being relevant to nursing, but it's also the fact that it's this partnership. It's not just about researchers. It's about researchers, it's about clinicians, it's about carers, it's about the public, and actually all of us working together. And I think when we think about going forward, those are some of the important issues which we need to think about. And really, we need to think about how we develop that in an environment which is both respectful, but it's supportive and challenging. And I think there is a particular challenge in that, making sure that something is supportive. And I have to be honest, I'm sure probably you come across that in your sort of day-to-day work. In nursing, research is still seen as a scary thing by a lot of practitioners. And I think there is that notion that we need to be supportive, we need to be inclusive, and to try and help people to engage in it. The areas that they work in primarily, their themes of research focus on patient and public involvement, experiences of care, patient-reported outcomes. So you can see very much a focus there on the experience of care, the patient's experience, what it is from their perspective that makes care, nursing care perhaps specifically, but more broadly, healthcare important. And this last one I think is also key when we're thinking both about what we do now and also about in the future, about translating knowledge into practice. It's all very well us doing research, and sometimes it's like, well, we've done that, we've published the report, we've written the article, but what happens afterwards? How do we get that into practice? How do we use the knowledge which we have? I think last year one of my colleagues gave a presentation here about, if you want, the RCN's sort of current focus, their sort of knowledge and innovation plan, which was designed to run from 2014 to 2018. I think here you start to see some sort of key shifts. It's not, you'll notice, first of all, the word research actually isn't in there, but it's about knowledge, but also about innovation. It's about how do we respond to some of those changes? How do we develop our knowledge to respond to some of those changes and challenges which we've already talked about, whether those are challenges and changes which are demographic, and some of those demographic changes are within the nursing profession as well as within society at large. But it's also about how we think about some of the economic challenges, how we think about some of the political and policy challenges. So this was about really trying to develop both nurses at an individual level and the nursing profession through knowledge and innovation, and in that actually transforming the care which we provide. You'll see there the aims about continuing to develop new knowledge. I remember one of my, the dean we had a few years ago, who always used to say there was a time when it was possible to know everything that there was to know. Now, knowledge is expanding at such a rate, it is so difficult, I think, to try and stay on top of even knowledge within our specialist field. But that's good because it means that we are learning, we're questioning, we're expanding our knowledge, we're learning how to do different things all the time. We also need to think about evaluating the impact, helping people to use that knowledge, and also to transform care by sharing knowledge. So if you want the doing the research is part of this, but it's much more than that. We need to embed it in a wider area of development. And the goals within that, and each of these had specific actions, were about using knowledge in practice and in policy, trying to make sure that this knowledge, it was dynamic, so it was constantly changing, but there was sufficient coverage, so it's also talking about both breadth and depth, and I think that's a key challenge which maybe we need to think about going forward. Making sure that the knowledge which we produce is rigorous. We know that just because research is done doesn't always make it good research. We need to think about how we question research, how we critically approach research, and think about how we use that then in our practice. And thinking about the ways in which we share the knowledge and how we can enhance ways to access it. I mean, one of the things I hear regularly from nurses working in sort of clinical practice is, I'd love to be able to get more time to look at some of this. I don't have that time. You know, sometimes research papers, dare I say, aren't always that accessible to read. You know, nurses sometimes in practice don't have access to some of those databases in their clinical areas. There's a lots of challenges there about how do we get some of those research messages out. I said that we have the RCM Research Society, and that's, if you want, my role. I've one of the members of the committee for the last 6 years and chairing it for the last 5. Again, you can see a similar history here. I love the name as it started as the Research Discussion Group back in 1959. But you can see from this slide the way in which that then developed through the sort of 1960s, expanding what they were doing, trying to involve more people, trying to think about, if you want, putting their toes in the early sort of waters of conferences, but then eventually thinking about it becoming the Research Society. But that's, again, it's only 1975. That's not that long ago. So what do we do within the Research Society? One of our aims is to try and provide research leadership and expertise, trying to support what the RCN as an organisation does in relation to its strategy, and trying to exert an influence over both policy and practice, but from an evidence base, trying to make sure that we have that evidence there, that we use that evidence. Supporting and meeting the needs of society's members. If you are a member of the RCN, you can opt to join any number of forums. The Research Society is one of those. So it's not just researchers, academics who are members of the society. We have student members, we have nurses in clinical practice. What I would also say is it's important to remember that the research within the sort of professional arm of the RCN doesn't just happen within the Research Society. All the other forums have their own sort of areas of research and interest which they're developing, and we work and we try and link with them. And it's about trying to provide the network for sharing experiences and building learning and development opportunities. Our strategy, we also run an annual international research conference, and I know that quite often we have quite good representation from colleagues here in Spain, so thank you for that. Usually we have probably in excess of about 20 different countries represented. I think the highest was probably up into the 30s. But it is an opportunity to try and share experiences. And I think sometimes, even though the challenges and the context which we face are sometimes very different, actually there's an awful lot of similarities as well. Trying to support capacity building from, if you want, the bottom up, trying to do some grassroots work, responding to policy consultations and position statements, trying to think about areas where perhaps as a research society we can work strategically with other parts of the RCM, and trying to engage with the wider RCM membership. So some of our activities, I was thinking when I was doing this slide, the current membership of 5,000 looked good compared with the sort of 100 which we had earlier. But when I look at, obviously, Significación with this sort of international, 5,000 appears quite small. It's good. We would like it to obviously to be bigger. We have the International Research Conference. We also run Winifred Raphael Memorial Lecture. That now is a public lecture which is held annually. It tours around the country. It tries to engage not just nurses, but other sort of practitioners, but also the public. A couple of years ago, Linda Aitken came to talk, which was great, and we heard about the RNCAS research in that. This year, we tied it in with World Mental Health Day, so the focus was on mental health, and we had somebody who has an expertise in that area. Responding to policy consultations. there's been a number of consultations which come out. So some of the ones which we've engaged in are things around things like the research councils, so trying to influence the funding and where that does or doesn't support nursing. We were involved in the Knowledge and Innovation Action Plan, but also other activities trying to embed, I suppose, the research within the wider activities. So things like working with the library staff to make sure there's accessible reading lists so that people can start to engage in the early stages of their research career. Social media presence, a couple of references have been made to that already. We have now got a Facebook group and we're trying to engage in people that way. We've also undertaken some various different bits of project work. So working with sort of the clinical research nurses, we have, some of the colleagues on this sort of committee have done some work looking at the Research Excellence Framework, which we have every 5 to 6 years within the UK. That looks at the research within the universities and the quality of that. And one of the things that was introduced in the last assessment was a sort of a percentage of the weighting was given to impact. And so you had to evidence what impact your researchers had. And my colleagues looked at those impact statements to see where nursing was within that. And I think what was quite interesting was sometimes nurses were having an impact, but it wasn't always that visible. And there could be pros and cons to that, bearing in mind what Hester said about sort of being part of the wider sort of healthcare agenda, but also the need, I think, as nurses to be able to say we are having this impact. And then sort of another area was about clinical academic careers, trying to support nurses to be able to develop their sort of academic career, whilst also maintaining very strong links with clinical practice. So going forward, some of our priorities for the Research Society is looking at further work regarding the impact of nursing research, trying to undertake some more in-depth analysis of that. Only this week, I think it was Monday this week, there was a package produced within the UK looking at how we can support clinical academic careers. And so as one of our strands of work will be with that, and also to continue with the conferences and the annual public lecture. From the RCN's perspective, on a wider sort of scale, I think it's a period of change. Probably periods of change are constant, I think, now within healthcare. But at the moment, we are looking, if you want, to the next stages, and looking at, the RCN is looking at how it reviews its strategic links with higher education. But also, you remember the Knowledge and Innovation Action Plan. That was due to run to 2018, and I think at the moment we're now beginning to think about, okay, so what comes next? Bearing in mind the challenges which have already been sort of highlighted, I think, in the other talks. So I'm going to leave it there because I think I look forward to having some discussion, to hearing from other colleagues as well, about how, not only the RCM, but how perhaps together we can take some of these issues forward. Thank you.